thank you for inviting me to speak today to this group. As was already said, I'm going to talk about it from FDA's point of view. And there's a number of different potential rare disease therapeutics. You've heard about most of them during the course of the day here, I think, at one time or another. I'm from the center that regulates gene therapy. The others are regulated at the Center for Drugs. But what I'm going to say applies generally, although I'm going to pull some examples specifically from gene therapy. And this is just a little plug. Let me just say we're extremely excited about gene therapies and the gene therapy pipeline. And there's been quite a remarkable explosion of interest in approved products, and this lists our approved products since 2017. So what are some of the challenges for clinical development in rare diseases? And I think you've heard them all alluded to, both at this session and during the course of the day. There's small numbers of patients in the trials, so you really want to try to make sure you learn everything you can from the trial. They have to be carefully planned. The course of the disease is heterogeneous, so what does that mean? It means that you can't really reliably predict how an individual patient is going to do. And so that makes it harder if you enroll them in a clinical trial and you follow them for a couple months to have some idea about whether or not the treatment has benefited that individual patient. So you really need to design the trials so that you can understand what the results told you about whether the product worked or not at the end. Some diseases are slowly progressive. Certainly that's a case here in general, I think. And so the time scale that many trials are conducted in, at least for marketing authorization, may make it challenging to show, a difference, what the benefit is for the product. I think there's also been every single thing I'm going to say, I think people have talked about sometime today. There may be challenges in identifying endpoints for the trials, and that's why a lot of people are interested in surrogate endpoints, both because the diseases are progressive and also it's just really hard to measure how people are doing. And it's also, natural history information may be limited for some of the types or some diseases, and natural history is really important in interpreting the results of the trials. There's some specific challenges for gene therapy that I'll just mention here, which speaks to a few extra differences with gene therapy clinical trials. And they mainly have to do with the fact that the gene therapies stick around. So once you're treated with the gene therapy in a clinical trial, you have that gene therapy. And it may, we don't really know, but it may be that it has a lifelong effectiveness. It may be that even if it's not that effective, the safety potential for safety issues are lifelong. And for that reason, early studies in healthy patients is generally not done like it might be done for conventional drugs. In addition, I think for these and for some of the other types of products, there can be special expertise needed for administration of the products. So you've seen this ladder already today in the first talk of this session of the stages of clinical trials. And I'm just going to talk about it a little bit from FDA's point of view of like what we look at, more so than what you've already heard about from the point of view of the patients. And I'll just say the preclinical, it says preclinical, but it really should be like preclinical and discovery. That phase, although that's not part of we don't regulate that research, it's important and we review it when an investigator proposes a phase 1 trial. And the importance of that phase, the preclinical research, the discovery, looking for the target, the scientific target, that really can't be overstated, sorry. It's very important to understand as much as possible about what you're planning to do in your trial before you start the trial, both to optimize safety, to figure out the best dose that you can. And it's important from the patient's point of view, because you want to be in the situation where if you're participating in a trial, the most has been done that was possible to make sure it's safe, and the most that's been done to optimize the potential of effectiveness. And that's what we think about in phase 1 is, has safety, have all the safety issues been minimized to the extent possible? Because sometimes there's things you can do to address them during the trial. Do we understand what a reasonable starting dose is? Does the investigator know how to give it? Like, have they looked at if there's some special device or some drugs that need to be given with it for it to work? Have they figured out what those are? And just all those things need to be done as part of the planning. I don't want to go through all these phases because you've heard about them, but I just will mention that sometimes for rare diseases, the phases get compressed between phase 1. It may roll into phase 3, or it may be called phase 2. In other words, things aren't as neat as this stair step would have you believe, because you just can't do that with rare diseases. Every single patient in one of these trials matters, their data matter. And so you have to really make sure you understand what you're doing. So in phase 1, we hope not only to learn about safety, but to understand what the optimal dosing is, and to have learned something about the activity of the product so that the later phase studies can be designed adequately. Because you just don't want to have something where the product works, but you miss the possibility of seeing that it's effective because you didn't do the basic work in phase 1. Okay, so now I'm just going to give a couple examples. This is just related to endpoints. I'm just going to say you can be lucky, or you can, develop something that's creative. We don't have all the answers and don't always know what's going to happen. But Zolgensma, which has been referred to, I guess, yesterday a couple times, this is one of the gene therapies that we approved. And I'm not going to go over the details on this page. It's for patients under 2 with spinal muscular atrophy type 1. And a lot of those patients, the majority, they don't survive beyond age 2. Here is a curve that shows you how well they did on this functional scale. And this one patient, recipient, at age 3, who just shows a result that these results don't occur in nature. So in this case, it was because there was such a profound effect of the product, it was a tiny study and didn't have control other than the natural history, what was understood about the natural history, and it was approved on that basis. Another example of an endpoint is in retinal dystrophy, and I just will say, because I was the office director of the reviewing office at the time that the studies were developed for this. This sponsor started looking, they knew that the endpoints was going to be a problem, a challenge for this. And they started looking into what kind of endpoints they developed well before the trials started. And in some of the earlier trials, they tried the endpoint to see how it would work. And we actually asked an advisory committee, we, FDA, asked one of our outside advisory committees for their advice about endpoints for gene therapy and eye diseases in general. And we asked about some specific ones. And they didn't really have an answer for what to use for this. And I still remember, this was a long time ago, but I turned to one of the advisors, this was in a public meeting, and said, so what should we use? And he said, I really have no idea. So FDA doesn't have all the answers, and our scientific advisors don't always have all the answers either. But what we did do was advise the company, whatever they wanted to propose to use, to validate it systematically as an endpoint. And that's what they did. Okay, I will just say it was challenging because one of the challenges I think is similar. I should have gotten to the slide before. One of the challenges is similar to a lot of other rare diseases in that people are, by the time people come to treatment or might be enrolled in a clinical trial, they may have progressed to the point where the functional scales, or the scales that you see, aren't good enough to measure the benefit that you might see in a trial. And so they developed their own scale. This is what they see. They have decreased light sensitivity. And the scale they developed was this randomized obstacle course. So I'm not going to go over it into detail. It's not really relevant to this, but I just thought it was really an interesting approach. And then they did a validation study to show that it was able to be used in the trial, and that's what they used. I just want to mention that this is the end, my last slide, I think. Patient engagement. So now I'm talking about we at CBER that has gene therapy. Well, all of FDA is interested in patient engagement. There are lots of opportunities, and you probably are aware of some of them for patient engagement. I want to point out some in particular for CBER, the Center for Biologics. We have a website called Regen Med Ed, which has lots of information about patient engagement in the area of regenerative medicine, which includes gene therapy. And we have, I want to point out this one meeting, patient and care partner listening meetings. We had a series of 2. One was last week, and one's coming up in December, and it's about a topic that I was asked about yesterday at the Science Day, so just mention it. And it's about enrolling people in early stages of the disease versus later in the disease, and to hear from patients and care partners what they think about it. I will mention one other thing that I don't have a slide for, and that is just generally the importance of collaborations, and you can solve some of these problems one by one, individual investigators. Some of them, like endpoints, might be good for the community to take a look at, and perhaps take a stab at, developing some of these things, because I think that, there's power in doing that as a group. And I will mention one thing, which is some of the issues with the products and the endpoints transcend the center at FDA. So it's not just, CBER, gene therapy, CEDAR, these other products. And so there is something called the Rare Disease Hub, which has just been stood up. There's going to be a public meeting about it later in October. But it will be a place where if there's a group of patient groups in a disease area that has a request for FDA or an ask and wants to have figure out what kind of discussion they can have with FDA, that would be a good place to consider going. So just thought I'd toss that in here at the end. Anyway, thanks so much. I'll join the crowd.